We're finishing up the global revolution. We're in the last chapter, learning our way into a new era. This is part 3, innovation in language analysis and approach. In so many of the elements of this global revolution, we lack knowledge, and indeed there is no guarantee that more research will lead to greater certainty, or that research will yield its results in time for them to influence decisions which are urgently required now. We know a lot, but we understand very little. We have therefore to learn to act in face of continuing uncertainty. Politics has always been the art of making decisions under conditions of uncertainty. The difference today is that the uncertainty is much deeper and is compounded with rapid change. This abiding uncertainty demands adaptation of our institutions and approaches to achieve greater flexibility and a greater capacity for reaction as we keep our sights on the moving targets of history. A central challenge in this connection is how to reconcile the economic language and concepts that dominate today with environmental language and concepts. Two approaches are possible. Environmental aspects can be added to conventional economic analysis, or economic approaches can be integrated within a broader ecological view. Great care and precise thinking are needed in this area, in which distinction must be made between different types of economics: macroeconomics, microeconomics, and environmental or ecological economics. We must find ways of integrating environmental aspects more effectively with the established and powerful approaches of both macro and microeconomics. The role of the market and its relation to that of government is of vital importance in seeking to resolve and manage the environmental problems. No solutions based exclusively on the market exist in the real world. All Western countries, for example, have developed mixed economies in which the governments provide a framework of regulations, incentives, support, and guidelines to the private sector. It has been acknowledged that the market approach alone cannot handle problems of common property resources or issues of long-term common interest. Government must provide the boundary conditions in the public interest. The problems we face are not only intellectual and analytical. Real interests and the structure of power are always at stake. In the real world, contradictory interests are inevitably operating. In establishing a normative approach, arrangements on action have to be established between power groups and indeed between nations, which we will evidently continue to have different interests, values, norms, and cultural traditions. The values on which action is based. We must be more explicit about the importance of values and ethics in the different areas of the problematique, for this will become a battleground for the future and a fundamental ingredient for the resolutique. If we accept concern for the prospects of future generations, we cannot escape consideration of how the problems and values of the present generation will influence these prospects. Our efforts to create a sustainable world society and economy demands that we diminish the profligate lifestyles in the industrialized countries through a slowdown in consumption, which may in any case be forced on us by environmental constraints. The ethical imperative also implies renewed efforts to eliminate poverty throughout the world. The ethical approach has not thus far been a matter of major concern, to say the least, for decision makers in politics and business. At the very most, we can find a cloudy ethical reaction among the public at large in their stands against corruption, against pollution, and against a conception of the economy which appears to forget that it should be above all designed to serve men and women. In the Western countries there exist, as we have said, frameworks of legislation to regulate the operations of the market forces, antitrust and anti-dumping laws, fair trading agreements, credit controls, and the like, as well as codes of good practice, often implicitly accepted by the business community. Such measures are necessary to ensure smooth and acceptable running of the capitalist society, to prevent fraud, to protect the workforce and the public. While there is a degree of ethical motivation in the regulatory system, many of the measures are matters of convenience to provide propitious conditions for economic progress. ecological disasters, sometimes causing death and destruction, raise these matters to a new level of importance and force industry to accept a degree of social responsibility in its own long-term self-interest, despite the fact that costs involved threaten next year's bottom line. More and more it will be necessary to develop the recognizable ethical norms that society demands and with which industry can live, albeit uncomfortably. These should be matters of current concern for the Eastern European countries now accepting the system of the market forces with somewhat uncritical enthusiasm. An ethical conception of international relations which the world badly needs cannot evolve unless it is also the inspiration on the national level and finally on the individual level as well. The development of such a conception will require much research and dialogue for a consistent, harmonious, and dynamic menu for coexistence to be proposed and adopted as a common denominator by a variety of peoples into their history, their culture, and their values. And that ends the First Global Revolution, a report by the Council of the Club of Rome by Alexander King and Bertrand Schneider. And this book was published back in 1991. This book is important because it does describe how the global community is being set up and how our governance is going to go. If you notice, they talk a lot about the NGOs, and they talk about all these different policies that must be done. Behind the scenes of popular politics, there are agencies which are guiding the direction of the globe. And this will move us into our new one world government, if you've been paying attention. It's important to pay attention to these kind of reports that are coming out. The only thing is, the only way to get a hold of them is probably online. Sometimes they're expensive, especially when they're in demand. This book at one time was unavailable. I had to wait for a year in order to find it, and it was not cheap. Luckily, it didn't exceed $100. Its original price was $15, back in '91, and when I bought it, it was just under $60. Add $4 shipping to that, so it was around $60. The price of this book is still holding around that price the last time I looked, and it is much more available because its price is making everybody put their books up because they know they can get some money for it. I hope you enjoyed. Thanks for listening.